It was a humid Midwest summer evening, August 9th, 2014. It was otherwise an unremarkable evening, save for the fact that it was the last Saturday before school started and my new job. And so to celebrate, some friends and I decided to go out to dinner for that evening. You know, I don't even remember how we ended up in downtown Ferguson that night. But there's, a great wine bar with a good menu, and we probably wanted to support a business that was about 10 minutes from our house. So there we were, the three of us sitting at black wrought iron tables outside, sipping on our chilled Chardonnay. We ordered avocado toast and cheddar gnocchi like good millennials. And we cheered to what was a pretty wonderful summer. That evening, a couple of times, some ambulances went by with their lights and their sirens on, and there were some drivers that sped by with their windows rolled down, yelling something unintelligible at us, but we didn't think about it at the time. We just sort of enjoyed the evening. St. Louis and much of the rest of the country changed that evening. We didn't know it at the time, but a few hours earlier, Michael Brown Jr. had been shot and killed by a Ferguson police officer a few hours before, about 2 miles east of where we were sitting. His body laid for 4 hours in the middle of a street that intersected a public housing complex in the warm summer heat with his blood rolling down the street. You know the rest of part of that story. The national news cameras were there to capture the erupting tensions from communities of color, specifically African Americans, who long had had disproportionately poor education, health, and economic outcomes. You saw faith leaders from around the world praying as they were arrested, and our local public leaders begging for calm as a lot of us woke up to a situation that we just didn't really know how to process. But a lot of other stories started that night. For me, my new job was to be the training manager at the largest diversity and inclusion organization in St. Louis. Talk about trial by fire. For the next 6 months, I sat at the front row of dialogues across any number of spectrums of differences in St. Louis as we all contended with how did we end up seeing race and class and community so differently from each other. I watched corporate attorneys talk to attorneys that were representing African Americans stuck in the endless cycle of cash bail, local political leaders really pushing each other about what their role had been in perpetuating white supremacy, and teachers thinking about how they were going to welcome the few children of color that they had in their private schools that year, and how they were going to make sure that they were going to feel safe and comfortable. To be fair, we didn't solve anything in those 3-hour sessions. But we started to build a lot of skills around listening intentionally, being empathetic, and we all realized we had to do something a little bit different. I know the narratives about what it's like in the middle of the country. I mean, turn on the news and you see farmers that are struggling with the ravages of climate change and steel workers that are feeling left behind in this new economy. And in my home state of Missouri, even today, we're arguing about the role of women and people of color and government in their lives. But for me, the middle of the country is sitting in those dialogues 5 years ago about having the opportunity to build bridges between people. You see, in the middle, we don't have the luxury of retreating to enclaves when we don't want our opinions tested. We don't have the resources to outspend the other side and make sure that our economies still grow. For me, the middle of the country is about coming together in community, having those really difficult decisions, and trying something new. Maybe the continuation of my post-Ferguson story will illustrate this. After being energized about the dialogues that I saw in the days and weeks after August 2014, in early 2015, I joined a predominantly white entrepreneur support organization in St. Louis that was charged for increasing the number of bioscience entrepreneurs in the region. They, with a number of their partners in the ecosystem, had long tried to diversify St. Louis's early-stage tech-based entrepreneurship ecosystem. In other words, it was very male and it was very pale. And though they had done a lot of good programs and they really meant well, they just weren't seeing the returns. So they brought the social worker in and said, fix it. So after a year, my boss and I convinced the 12 largest entrepreneur support organizations to shift their relationship, to build an intentional collective whereby they would start mutually reinforcing activities, they would do some radical listening, and they would really try to attack the structural barriers in the ecosystem. With funding from the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City, I, at the ripe age of 28, was suddenly in charge of operationalizing the St. Louis Equity and Entrepreneurship Collective. It's a very long name, but it's very specific. So we set out doing some radical listening, having unconscious bias training, really sharing our data, talking to the entrepreneurs that we wanted to serve, understanding how our system was perpetuating these barriers. And it was hard, and it was difficult, and sometimes it was really uncomfortable. But we knew that it was necessary. 3 years later, the group has doubled in size. Our venture capital firms are tripping over themselves to diversify the race and gender of their staff members. And using census data, St. Louis was recently named the region with the highest percentage of female-owned startups. Thanks. I'm not surprised that an effort like this took off in the middle of the country. And it's happening every day. In the middle, we're nimble enough to try things. We have the opportunity to get every single organization in the room to really talk to their leadership, to really talk about pulling resources in a way that's not just platitudes, but can really change things. I'm excited about the middle of the country because we have to do things differently, right? And I think the future of this country lies in the middle. I recently read an article by author Karen Odethal that sums up some other reasons why being in the middle is really important and exciting for women, people of color, rural folks, and low-income entrepreneurs. She contends that there are more women, older people, people of color, and lower-income entrepreneurs in the middle because they get fewer messages, either explicitly or implicitly, that they can't do it, so they believe that they can. Imagine that. And when resources are limited, they're less likely to be entirely pushed out by other types of entrepreneurs, which happens in other ecosystems where other folks dominate. Today, as a program officer at the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City, I change jobs a lot. I see the power of being in the middle for supporting entrepreneurs of all backgrounds. In Garden City, Kansas, a state that's traditionally thought of as being predominantly white, over 40 languages are spoken. And the community has rallied around an entrepreneurship ecosystem that has been 3 decades in the making, made up primarily of immigrants from Latin American countries who were originally there to work in the meatpacking plants. And in Memphis, civic leaders understood that the future of their healthcare and logistics sectors resided in entrepreneurship. So to build the supports, they recruited entrepreneur support organizations from around the country who were explicitly known for their commitment to racial equity. And in Memphis, 3 young men who happened to be African American, named William, Alan, and Derek, formed Mortar to bring supports to their local communities as they sought gentrify. 3 years later, they're Obama Fellows. They've purchased property as a way to maintain local control of their development, and they're models of compassionate economic development for communities across the country. And I'm really proud to say that they're a grantee of the foundations. I know anecdotes only tell part of the story, but there's some encouraging data here too. So according to the Kauffman Indicators of Entrepreneurship, the early survival startup rate for the state of Missouri is 85%. That means that 85% of businesses that start in the state of Missouri still exist after a year. And it's the second highest rate in the country after Maine. And no offense to the coasts, much higher than California or New York or Massachusetts. Now, we start businesses at a lower rate than other places do. But when they start in the middle, they succeed. No matter where you are, the success of entrepreneurs depends on everyone in the community. So I have a formula that makes this easy to remember. I am a social worker, so I'm not good at math, but I can remember this formula, so hopefully you can too. 3 plus 997 equals 1,000. So here's what that means. Each month, 3 of every 1,000 people in the United States will start a business. They are the ones taking on the risk, they are hustling, they are grinding, but the remaining 997 people constitute a community that plays a substantial role in that entrepreneur's success. Those 3 don't succeed without the 997 who purchase their products or give them a hug when the day is hard or hold the kid while they're having an investment meeting or give them coffee. We're doing the work in the middle, and it's starting to show. There's a sense of excitement and optimism. You feel the energy because we have realized that our economies work better when everyone is engaged. It's born out of us facing our real challenges head on and doing something different. But, there's a role for you too. You can be one of our 997. Even if you're not in the middle of the country, there's things that we all can do to support the diversification of entrepreneurship in this country. You can connect your purchasers to our suppliers. When you travel to the middle for conferences, feel free to shop local and small. If you're thinking about where your company's next office might be, consider the middle of the country. Or when you're looking for stories about entrepreneurship, we've got a bunch that you could use. It's summer again. And this August will be the 5th anniversary of the death of Michael Brown Jr. and the Ferguson uprising. It's an opportunity for a lot of us who live in that backyard to think about what we're doing, about how we've done things differently, and what more we have to do. Inevitably, you will hear stories about what has changed or what hasn't changed in those last 5 years. And when you do, I encourage you to dig a little bit deeper. Find a business that's small or growing in the middle of the country. Find a way to support it. Amplify it. It's easy to perpetuate tired narratives about what it's like in the Midwest, but I hope that you'll help us retell the story about what it's like in the middle. Thank you.